Well, here we are once more. Goodness gracious. Welcome back, everyone. Wow, today is a bit of an exciting day. One, we're actually starting the stream on time. So that's a novelty and an innovation I hope that we can carry forward. But that's not the thing that is exciting me the most today. Today, the thing that's exciting me the most is our project. And it's kind of a fun project. Basically, the idea is to make a Romance language out of English. So some of you may have heard of the Anglish project. It's not really a centralized project or anything, just this idea of coming up with a version of English that has only material directly descended from Old English. This is kind of the opposite of that. So instead of taking English and removing all the non-Germanic material, we are taking English and removing all of the Germanic material, but keeping as much of the phonology, etc., as possible. So that's the idea. And codename Anglese, we may end up changing that, I don't know, as we go through. This is a project I've been thinking about since probably, mid 2000s, I think. I've had little sketches of it, but I think it'd be more fun rather than dig those up. Let's just make it over again using what we know now together. So that's the idea. I am looking at the chat here, seeing a lot of familiar faces and some new ones. Welcome, everyone. Chorizo, the start of a new conlang. Often seen, much more often than the end, but I suppose that's a good thing. Lucy, thank you for the compliments on the lighting and background. I feel like we finally figured out what to do, or at least that's the royal we. You knew what to do. I'm the one who has trouble implementing it. All right, and yes, so this is where we are. I'm excited. I hope you're excited. I've actually prepared a little bit of material for this because it is something that I've been thinking about for a long time. So I thought, well, let's start ourselves off on the right foot with some background. But I'll get into all of this when we start this first segment. Let's just let's chill for a few minutes here, and echoed words. There's some matching going on here. The paintings, so the paintings were done by my grandfather. He was an artist, and finally we've had an opportunity to put up some of his paintings on the walls in the new place. I was very much limited by wall space where I was before, but now we have at least two paintings, and that is a map of Scotland, sort of a reprint of an early modern map of Scotland, which you can't really see from this angle, but I assure you it's very cool. So that's the gist. Let's start the first segment, shall we? I'm going to welcome future YouTube, into our laboratory of cockamamie schemes. So here we go. YouTube, welcome. Okay, so I know I'm always starting new things. At least you know that I'm still in character, right? We're starting something else new today. We'll never finish anything that we start. We know this, but this is part of the joy of it. What are we starting today? We are starting we're working on a little project called Codename Anglese. What is it? Anglese is sort of the opposite of the Anglish idea that's been floating around the internet. So the idea of Anglish is English without all of the non-Germanic elements. So only stuff that comes from Germanic in Anglish. Well, Anglese is the opposite. So it's taking English and removing all of the Germanic elements and filling up that gap with stuff that comes from Latin, Romance. So it's essentially an English Romance language. I think there is at least one other version of this idea floating around on YouTube, but I have not seen it because I want to be able to sort of have a blank slate. And what we can do once we've laid out once we've laid out the broad strokes that we can compare and contrast and see what different decisions we've made. All right, so onwards and upwards. Let's go into the side webcam, and I'm going to just scoot here. I'll explain what's on the screen in a moment. I'm just going to address some of the stuff from the chat. Saughton's holding up 80 feet of copper wire. Excellent. Excellent. Keep up the good work. Drick Sarkar is asking, will we be changing modern English synchronically or evolving Latin with an Old English substrate? The latter. So we are going to be essentially taking a version of spoken Latin that's plausibly that could have plausibly been learned by speakers of early Old English and adapting it using Old English as a substrate. Let's see what else. Some questions about the audio. I think my levels seem okay in my interface. There may be something, somewhere along the pipes. There might be some issue, but hopefully that's not too distracting. Let me just confer with Lucy to make sure we are good. And in the meantime, let's take a look at what we have on the screen here. Okay, so yeah, here's our IPA keyboard. That's pretty normal. But what else do we have? We have some Wikipedia articles open for us to play with. So the Proto-Romance language, which is going to give us some information about the language that we're starting from. Also, the phonological history of English, which is going to give us some guidance as to how to develop the language. So essentially what we want to do is take Proto-Romance and evolve it forward using the sound changes of English. Now, this is not something you can just do without thinking about it, because a lot of the sound changes of English require you to be starting from the point of view of, say, Old English, and we won't exactly be starting from that point. So we're going to have to make some judgment calls. But we do have some help. And what is that help? We have an extensive list of loanwords from Latin into Old English. And this is what we see in the leftmost screen here. So to read this chart, we have the Latin form, and then the form that we see in Old English. A gloss, often we've had a semantic shift in between Latin and Old English. And then an estimated date for the borrowing. And this is necessarily a bit vague and broad and up in the air, but it does seem that we have earlier borrowings and later borrowings, which we can tell sort of based on the meanings involved. Things involving Christianity are unlikely to have been borrowed before the mass adoption of Christianity. Also, there are issues of phonological changes which have or haven't happened in either Latin or Old English. So, for example, we know that the orthographic V in Latin in the classical period was something like a W. Well, it wasn't something like a W, it was a W. And then as we get later, that W undergoes fortition, and we get something like a V, so a voiced bilabial fricative. And words come in from Latin to Old English. Earlier on, they come in with a W in Old English. So wallu becomes wall. So rampart, giving us our modern word wall. We've got 4 of them here. Or vicus becomes weech, so village or settlement. But later on, we have something like versus, like a verse, gets borrowed as vers. So this is a good way of dating the borrowing. So the ones where the Latin V is borrowed as W are probably earlier. The ones where the Latin V is borrowed as F are probably later, because Latin has undergone a change in between those two periods. All right, So that's the idea there. So that's why we have this division between early loans and late loans. I've given a very wide date range to the late loans. Probably they don't extend all the way towards the end of the period, but nevertheless. And what I'd like to do is base our work on the early loans as much as possible. And then we can take some inspiration, because it's a very limited set of early loans that we have, that we're fairly certain were made in the early Old English period. And we can augment those words with later loans, where perhaps we don't have a certain sequence in the early loans to work with. And so this is going to be the core of what we're doing in the first step anyway. So we're going to come up with a sort of an Anglo-Saxon adaptation of spoken Latin, and then we're going to move it forward from there. So that's the plan. And the way that we are going to do this is we're going to use a set of, we're going to, instead of going through every single, instead of going and making through a very formal set of rules, what we're going to do as a shortcut is look at particular phonological sequences or individual sounds which frequently change in the Romance languages, and decide what our language will do with each of them. This will give us a really good coverage of Latin, and will allow us to get pretty close to a reasonable, Old Englishified Latin. Then we can tweak it from there. And so I've got basically up to, from rules numbered from 1 to 43. These aren't really rules so much as different phonological shapes, and these are taken. I'll come back to the full screen webcam to show you the book. This numbering system is not standard or anything. It just happens to be taken from a book which I like a lot, which is called From Latin to Romance in Sound Charts. There you go. Good book. This was the first book I ever read about historical Romance linguistics. It's quite old-fashioned. It's typewritten and everything. Very charming book. So I've taken the 1 to 14 numbering and the sort of phonological sequences that we're going to be dealing with from there. So I highly recommend that book if you are interested in sort of getting getting to grips with historical Romance linguistics at the very, very outset. You will, if you are anything like me, you will read this with a big smile on your face. All right. So that said, let's go back into the spreadsheets, and let's see what we have. Just checking some stuff from the chat. So this depends on what we mean by modern. Replying to Isaac, depends on what we mean by modern Britannian. So Britannian. So if we envisage the Latin spoken in Britannia developing sort of naturally without influence from speakers of Old English, then it won't be that so much. It'll be more like Frankish. So let's use Frankish as an example. So Frankish, a Germanic language which ends up being spoken in Gaul, and is fairly quickly supplanted by the Latin as spoken in Gaul, as adapted by the Franks. So that's the situation we're dealing with here. So we're going to have a very, very heavy influence from Old English, and not a great deal from sort of British Latin, which now I am not necessarily 100% up to date on this literature about Latin as spoken in Roman Britain, but my understanding is that we don't have a lot of very certain distinguishing characteristics that would distinguish British Latin from other forms of spoken Latin in other parts of the empire. So, all right, so that's what we're going to start with, And I see some good stuff in the chat here. Yes. So basically, yeah, Wilhelm, what we're going to be doing is eventually then, once we've got this Old English based language, or this sort of Old English substrate romance, then we're going to take it forward and have it interact with Norman French, just like what happened in Middle English, and then eventually to sort of international Latinate vocabulary in the Renaissance. And yeah, so we could have doublets and triplets coming from the same Latin word. But let's get started, shall we? So I'm going to highlight these because these are our sort of North Stars. See, would that look nice to a certain extent? Maybe if I can find a better one. Don't mind me, just trying to find a decent... Ugh, these are hideous. I'm sorry. All right, there we go. That's better. So we can see some basic things that happen. So let's look at our gold standard loanwords, or what we're going to want to accommodate these. So first of all, Latin ancora becomes Old English ancor. So we are losing our final vowel, which is the first notable thing, and we have our stress fixed on the first syllable of the word. Now this isn't different from between Latin and English because ancora also has initial stress in Latin, but we'll see that a stress shift is in the cards for this language. So let's take a look. Do we have trying to see if we have a nice place to put this rule in our schema, or are we going to have to invent something else right off the top? I think we may. So let's say final A is going to drop out. That's the first thing. All right, next up, but otherwise nothing changes. Ancora. So let's move on. Campus becomes camp. So a word that means field becomes battle. It's an interesting semantic drift. We have field of battle. And there are other words that, of course, that come up in this family, like what we get in French is champion. So someone who fights on the battlefield, campio, which gives us Old English kempa, meaning soldier as well. What's interesting is that campus from Latin is borrowed into Germanic as meaning battlefield. Then in Germanic, a form campio is produced, meaning warrior, and then that's borrowed back into Latin as campio, champion. So yeah, interesting situation. Nevertheless, nothing too interesting going on here, but we lose our us. We lose our us as well. And then we see what happens with candela. Candela becomes candel. So it looks like we are going to be stress shifting. So here we have first unambiguous evidence of stress shifting. Candela, going to candel. And with that stress shift, we also lose the long vowel, the long e, which is no longer in a stressed position. So we can say, let's just write down stress shift. We can give ourselves more numbers for these. There's no problem. So we'll just call that stress shift and leave it at that. Another thing is long vowels in unstressed syllables. So let's say, long vowels. I don't know how to. Ooh, that didn't work. Ooh. Light mode engaged. No, thank you. There we go. anyway, we'll call that long vowel, and those shorten in unstressed syllables. No need to worry too much about the formalism here. It's just a way of getting our notes down. Okay, what's next? Castra becomes chaster. Chaster. This is interesting because this shows us something kind of fun. So we have what amounts to Latin. I'm just going to write it down here. Castra. And we're going from that into, let's get the IP keyword out. We're going into something like, now there's some debate as to what this vowel is exactly, but something like chaster, chaster, or chaster. We don't exactly know what's going on with the rhotic. So how to take this? Well, it seems what's happening is that we have palatalization of the k before this front vowel a, which also seems like it's turning into a diphthong a. The other option, depending on your views about Old English, is that this actually is just chaster, no diphthong, and the ea is just an orthographic thing because we don't like to write the palatalized C right before an A. So these are the two options as to what's going on in Old English, chaster or chaster. I'm going to take the option that it's a monophthong in this case because I think it simplifies our lives. So what happens then is we have the a fronting and then causing palatalization. So the a fronts and then causes palatalization. So this is going to fall under Rule 5. So let's write it in our Old English notation here. So this C with a dot over it, EA, is going to correspond to cha. Cha. I'll write that down, the phonetics just beside it, so that we can remember if you're not familiar with Old English notation. So yeah, we're basically going to be putting this into West Saxon. I see someone pointed out in the chat, but the font size is too small for you to see. Yeah, Wilhelm, the palatalization does differ in Old English dialects. So, dialects like Northumbrian won't have it. But in this case, we're going from a sort of a West Saxon base here. So that gives us what to do with ka. But then notice that we actually are putting ourselves in a problem because we also have candela going to candel and campus going to camp, not champ. And I think it's worth asking why. In the case of campus, what is probably happening is the back vowel in the next syllable is freeing us. Okay, I think I have to explain a little bit about Old English phonology. So in Old English, we have a change where Proto-Germanic a fronts to a. And then, seemingly what happens is, when that a is followed by an a or an o or an u in the next syllable, so a back vowel, that a goes back to a. And so maybe that's what's happening with campus. The u is hanging around long enough to take the a back to a. That's one interpretation. Either that or it's just a less nativized loan word. There are different ways out of this. I think we're going to want to err on the side of making things feel very, very Old Englishy. So I'd rather do something like chaster rather than keep it as caster. But that explanation works for campus, but it doesn't quite work for candela because we quite clearly have a front vowel here. I'm seeing, oh yes, nasals. Do the nasals play a role? Yeah, that's actually, I think, that's a good line of attack for this. Let's look in phonological history of English so that we can see um, what we have. I want the table of contents. There we go. So we're looking at something like, so here is the A restoration that I just mentioned. Hydrating and stretching. Okay, now I'm stretching. So short A is backed to ah. And then we get the palatalization, which is what gives us chaster. But we need to go, I think, a little bit farther back. Right, yes, okay. So Anglo-Frisian brightening is the fronting of ah to ah, which does not affect the nasal. So good eyes. So then we have an easy way out. Yay. The interesting thing is that this is actually something that's earlier than this occurs before the migration of Anglo-Saxons to England, although these loans are usually placed after the migration, because I believe they're not shared with other Germanic languages, or they're not straightforwardly shared with other Germanic languages. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what to make of that, but since we're just having fun today, we can leave that. Right, so we're going to not do that for nasal vowels. And so here we have the outcome of ah, so this is stressed ah, we've already learned, is a, except before a, o, u, except before nasal. Great. So that's what's going to, I can write that probably more eloquently, or before nasal. Okay, so moving on. We also have this tra becoming ter, which is interesting. And I don't think we have a way of putting that easily in our rule schema. So let's, essentially what's happening is we're losing that final a and then epenthesizing a vowel. Epenthesizing a vowel at the end of a word. So we have this chaster going to chaster. All right, so yeah, I'll just also point out that the history of this sound in Old English and its predecessors is a bit weird, and some people don't really buy this sort of going from ah to and back to ah and then back to ah. Yeah, a bit of a strange situation. Right, but that's that. Let's keep going. So discus going to dish. So this is a fun one. We can put this under 35, I think. So so SC goes to sh, which is spelled SC with a dot over it. So discus going to dish, and I think that we have dealt with everything else in this word. Another one, draco going to draka. This is interesting because it seems now. So this, I think, may have some morphology going on in it because we have this this class of nouns in Old English called the weak nouns, which end in an a, and at least in the masculine, they end in an a, and they take N's in their other case forms. And this is very similar to the Latin O ending, third declension Draco, Draconis, which ends in O and takes N in its other case forms. And indeed, these are actually cognate. These are actually cognates. So there may have been some awareness of that, and that caused people to loan Draco into something that sort of felt like the same kind of declension in Old English. So we can treat it like that, or we can treat it like, or we can treat it phonologically. So the O going into an A. I think we probably want to avoid having just O's hanging out at the end of words. So from that perspective, I think we should probably just have these long vowels in unstressed syllables reduced down so that they're not all 5. We only have a few. And in the case of O, we could have it O goes to A. So we don't have to have a special rule for that. All right. So fourth, let's go fourth. Draco to Draca. Gigant. So here we have a word gigas in Latin, which has the oblique stem gigant. And Old English seems to take its loan word from this oblique stem, from the non-nominative stem, gigantem, things like that, which is very common in the Romance languages to take nouns like this in this oblique stem. So instead of to use Draco as an example, instead of loaning Draco, we would loan Dracon. So that oblique stem, Dracon. Here we have gigant. So let's just assume we're dealing with something like gigante or an accusative like gigantem. We're going to just obliterate that last syllable, so it doesn't really matter what happens. But let's say we have that. Then what do we have to do? So we're going to shorten this long vowel. We already know about that. And we're going to palatalize the G. So this is another thing that happens in the Romance languages. We have rampant palatalization, and our Anglese was going to be no exception there. Delightful. Talk in the chat about nominative versus accusative. It is true that generally you can analyze Romance forms as descending from the accusative. However, in Old French, we still have a nominative accusative case distinction, or a case distinction that originated in nominative versus everything else. So I don't think we can totally count out nominative in this language, especially when people are coming from when the substrate language also has a more or less well-developed nominative accusative distinction itself. It seems to me that speakers of Old English just knew that us was something that they could that these sort of nominative endings are something that they could just get rid of. And maybe it's more realistic to try and accommodate the nominatives in this language, but I think for just the purposes of vibes, I'd like to just get rid of them. So whether you interpret that as coming from the accusative or just it's some sort of neutralization to a form with no endings for most of these nouns, either way. Right. So onwards and upwards. So we've got gigant. Then we get mille, which means 1,000, but it's specifically in the context of 1,000 paces. It's a unit of measurement. This is where we get mile from. And not too much to say here. It seems that all short vowels are just going to delete in Old English, in Anglese as well. So, mil. Then we get something kind of interesting. Urkeus. Urkeus turning to orc. And here's where we see something that is very, very typical of the Romance languages, where, and I'm going to bring up the part in the Proto-Romance here. Let's see if I can find where it's discussed. So the Proto-Romance vowel system has been described in different ways, and people argue about it, of course, but the length-based system of classical Latin is usually understood as being reconfigured into a height-based system. And so we have the original long E-U becoming the high or close E-U. Then the short E-U are analyzed as lowering to E-U. Why do we say that they're lowering to E-U? Because eventually they're going to merge with E-O. And Luc Ranieri's got some good content on this. Not everyone agrees that this actually happened. But what we do know is that eventually the short E and U turn into A-O. Or at least they merge with the short A-O of classical Latin. So you get something like pira, meaning pears, turning to pera. And you have something like mille turning to mil. Sorry, did I say the short? They merge with the short. They merge with the long. They merge with the long A-O. So let's take an example of a long cena, dinner. So we have E, short I going to E, long I going to I, long E going to E. That's the gist. And the same thing happens over in the back vowels as well. Okay, super. I am going through a lot of stuff here pretty quickly because there's a lot to go through and I want to get to the fun part, but if there's anything that's mega confusing, just let me know. Oh, Logan, good luck with the move. Yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy moving, much less at long distances. Okay, so we're getting through it. Why did I bring this up? Because here's where we see an example. So let's take this and make it a bit more orderly so we can see this sort of paradigm. So we have long I, get rid of the examples. We have long I, this is generally what happens in most Romance languages. Long I becoming I. Let me just use the sounds. We get E becoming E. We get E becoming E. We get E becoming E. And then what happens to short E? Stuff. Stuff happens. So it is usually analyzed as E. So this is what happens to the non-low vowels in the front. Let's see what happens to the non-low vowels in the back. It's basically the same thing. U becomes U. U becomes O. O becomes O. And O becomes O. So it opens up. And so this is, if you ignore this E, U, and just mentally transpose them down here, the 7 vowel Proto-Romance system. Okay, so this article takes a different approach. It reconstructs what it thinks of as an earlier stage. Nevertheless, this is what we have. We have a 7 vowel system for the short vowel, for the stressed vowels. And voila, Urkeus is an example. Urkeus going to orc because U has lowered to O, more or less. Okay, so onwards and upwards. So that's what's going on with O, U goes to O. What's interesting is that we don't have, at least I don't think we have, a palatal here. I could be wrong. Let's see what Wiktionary gives us. Yeah, orc, orcos, cup or tankard. So we don't have palatalization here. It seems that we're going to lose that eus before palatalization happens. So maybe what we can do is we can analyze this, I think, more cleanly if we use that accusative only hypothesis. So let's say everything is going to come from accusatives except for Draco. And we're just going to write them without the M's because this is sort of convention in Romance linguistics because the M's very, very early drop off. Okay, so if we start from these vowel final forms, we don't have to have this special rule. And what we can do is just say that the yod, and why don't we say a W sound as well, a glide, any glide before the vowel is also dropped. So this form urkeu is going to be urkiu. So what happens is these vowel sequences in spoken Latin turned into glide vowel sequences as a bit of background. So we have actually something like orkiu, which then, now I'm in IPA, goes to orc. Okay, right. I'm going to keep going in this segment until we get to the very end of this, and then we'll pause for a little break. So, orc, urkeu becomes orc pitcher, orku, orcus becomes orc. Yeah, and Tolkien fans, you can discuss amongst yourselves. But that's what's going on here. So we have this orcus word being borrowed as orc, and so these two merge despite the fact that they look rather different in Latin. Okay, next, scribere. Okay, just sorry, saw the chat catch up. Chrysostion says that Wiktionary, yeah, so there's some debate as to when these loans happen. The fact is that Germanic languages have been borrowing from Latin since the Proto-Germanic stage. And they've been speakers of Germanic languages have been in contact with Latin speakers, over centuries. And trade contact, cultural influence, obviously there's some military stuff going on there as well. So loanwords are coming into Germanic, and it's also a two-way street, but loanwords are coming into Germanic a lot through the centuries, and it's unclear when exactly it was each word was borrowed. So our interpretation or at least my interpretation in this is that orcus is a borrowing that comes into Old English in around between 500 and 650. Maybe they have a reason for thinking that it comes from into Proto-West Germanic. I don't know. I mean, because of Old Saxon, maybe, but we can't really say either way. So, yeah, I think that's something where you could legitimately have differences of opinions. All right. So, let's take stock. We have recovering my train of thought. No, just to finish what we were saying. If you wanted to analyze urkeus, the urkeu borrowing as going back earlier, then we would change the rule. And indeed, if we see an example where we get palatalization from something like that, then maybe we will want to do that. But for now, I think it's fine to leave it as is. Okay. Scribere, to write in Latin, gets a narrower meaning in Old English. Schrivan. But for our purposes, we're interested in what happens not to the SC. We already understand that. The long vowel is maintained, so we can let that lie. But what we see is the B turning to F, and the F in Old English is writing a V sound. So we're starting to see some of that, perhaps some of that Romance lenition. So scrivere being borrowed as skrivan. So let's find where that lives. Here. So we're going to borrow this as F, which is V. Lovely. Okay, next. Signu. In Latin, this was probably a velar nasal. This GN, velar nasal, followed by a coronal nasal. So signu. What happens to it in Old English? We get sein. So here we see another example of the lowering of the short E. So we can put that in here and delight in that. Yes, lovely. So, but what's interesting is we actually get the palatalization of the G. So sein. Oh, Drick, Sarkar, thank you. Yes. This is actually not going to be, these aren't all going to have the same reflex. You're right. So P, B to F, but W to W. And we're going to have some reason to say that later. Good catch. And by the way, that reason is pawo going to pawa, which is a later loan, but that even is almost stronger evidence that we should keep the wa. All right. So what we were talking about, GN going to yin. So we get our palatal G. For GN, I don't know if we want NY to do the same thing. That could be, although these two sequences behave the same in other Romance languages, we may not want that to happen in Old English. But at least we have something here. So GN to yin. So signu to sein. Up next, we have the long A fronting to A. So this is basically exactly what's happening in Rule 1, where we get fronting of A, except before A, O, U, or nasal. Here we have an A afterwards, but it looks like it deletes first and then allows A to front. Okay. So I don't think we need to actually touch that one. Next, trabe becoming traf. This is already dealt with as well by rules 1 and rule 29. So that's good. Wallu, wow. So here we have something interesting. We have this sort of backing diphthong showing up before L and then another consonant in Old English. So we can put that under Rule 21. So they remain LC, but cause vowel breaking. So that's that diphthongization. Let's take a look. Yeah, here we are. So breaking of front vowels. So what would have happened is wallum. Let's write this down just so that we can see. Wallum. becomes, let's write it more phonetically. So for some reason, we're not getting a long vowel in Old English there. We can ignore that for now. So we get wal. Well, first, let's remove the final vowel, wal, and then front the a. Now that the u is gone, wal, and then we are going to diphthongize the front vowel here, wow, wow, and that's our Old English form. All right, so wow. What do we need to do about this? We just need to write down that that in Rule 21, this LC sequence causes breaking. It's enough of a mnemonic for us for now. And our last ones, wiku, wiku, weech. So this is something where we need to amend our rule of our palatalization rule for k. So this also applies when after EA. So we, instead of getting weak, we get weech. And then finally, weenu, going to wean, wine, although I think there's a lot of debate as to whether this is actually a loan word. Not going to get into that. Okay, so we've gleaned what we can from these early loan words. I think it's a good time for us to take a little break. I'm going to come back to the full screen webcam and bid farewell to our friends over at YouTube. Thank you for joining us. Come back next time where we will continue this work and build Anglese unto glory. See you then. Right, okay, friends. I feel very hyper today, but in a good way. I'm going to take a quick break and calm myself, go into the Zen mode of romance, of romlanging, which is it's like a flow state. So I'll see you in a couple of minutes. And we are back. Okay. All right. How is everyone doing? I'm enjoying myself here. This is fun. I see in the chat some talk of lenition. Yeah. We haven't actually seen any cases of P yet. We will once we get into the later loans, and then the question for us is, what are we going to do about them? And I think this is where we can let vibes be our guide. All right. So I think probably the best thing to do is just to jump in. I will say hello to YouTube once again. YouTube, welcome back. We are building Anglese. Last time we sorted out all of the sort of basic sound changes that we could glean from early loans from Latin into Old English. So now we're going to fill in the gaps and come up with a reasonable set of sound changes that can allow us to derive any word from Latin into this Anglese Romance language that we're building. So I think without further ado, let's jump into the spreadsheet, shall we? You know you're having fun when a bunch of spreadsheets come on the screen. I see. Oh yeah, Drixarkar. So yes, it's true that actually TR Ash, which is the AE ligature, F isn't trav, it's traf. So in Old English, F represents both F and V, depending on where in the word it is. So word finally, it's F. So I'll make that clear here. Yeah, I'm seeing some people saying that the mic audio is low, but I'm also having people telling me the mic audio is not low. So I'm not sure what to do. I'm speaking as loudly as I can without it going into the red, which I'm told is a bad thing just from the sort of law of colors. So I don't know. Write your local representatives or something. Let's see what we are going to do next. So we've got some of our rules filled in. I think what we need to do is now go through the rest of them and find something plausible for each of them. Let's just do a bit of cleanup first. Okay, so we're good. Now let's look. So the first thing that it gives us is ariu, this common suffix in Latin, which becomes even more common in the descendant languages, which forms something like an agent noun, among other things. The lucky thing for us is that actually this ariu was probably itself productive in Old English as a lone morpheme. We have the suffix ere, which gives us the modern English like any of these agent nouns that come in that ended I'm trying to think of an example. Writer. So this looks like we have a sort of an easy win there. Ariu, turn to ere. And if we look, we'll actually see an example of this. Mortariu becoming mortere, mortar, as in mortar and pestle. So that's good. Done. Atiku. So I don't know that we have anything ending in atiku. I don't think we do. And this is a shame because this is one that I think will be a bit tough for us to deal with on its own. So I'm going to leave that for now. We'll come back to it. The ow diphthong. Let's see, do we have any ows in the data set? We do not. So this is going to depend. What happened in Proto-Germanic, that the Proto-Germanic ow gives the Old English al. So it's explained here. So we have this, say, Proto-Germanic form draumas, dream. Well, actually, it meant joy, but it comes to mean dream, which gives us draum. So the EA is representing this al, diphthong. So what we could do, we're saying that this is around 475 to 900. Now I think we're dating our adoption of Latin or of spoken Latin by the Anglo-Saxons somewhere in the 500 to 650 period. So this is the period after the migration, but before or during the sort of Christianization process, which is a reasonable time for them to start speaking Latin. So Old English does not have ow, but it has a, which comes from ow. And I think it may have been obvious enough, or it may have been close enough that we can just straightforwardly take ow and turn it into a in Old English. So so what does this give us? This gives us something like, say we have the Latin word causa, which comes to mean thing. That's going to turn into, for first caus, then chaos, and then chaos, because of the palatalization rule. So we're starting to see some of the ordering between these rules. So we have chas, and this would be a decent word for thing in this language, chas. Seeing some stuff about the articum suffix. Modern languages, yeah. So a lot of times when you see this suffix come down, it's French borrowings, but there are also inherited versions, as Chrysostom says. Asco in Spanish is a good example. Yes, so this is why I think this is something that we might want to push until we've done all the constituent parts of it. It's just a sort of a quirk of this book, which we are using as our kind of outline. From Latin to Romance and Sound Charts by Peter Boyd Bowman. That we have it as a separate heading, so we don't have to worry about that right now. Ow. I think we're going to have ga turn into ya. Ya. Just like the other kinds of palatalization that we have. So if ka becomes cha, ga becomes ya. I think that's reasonable. Let's see. This CL, the C apostrophe L means C and L, which have come together because of the results, because of the drop of some vowel that was in between, which you often see in Latin diminutives. Let's see if we have any examples in our corpus. No, we do not, sadly. We do not have any examples. We have an example of the GL and the BL collision, but we don't have an example of the CL, which is a bit of a shame, but we could maybe take inspiration from what we have in the GL case. So tegula becomes tile. Tile. So we get the G and L coming together, and then this, and then it's what it seems to me to be the G just acting like it's a normal G, so palatalizing after this E. So perhaps we don't have to do anything in particular. Perhaps we just have to say it's kl. So let's see if we can come up with an example word. This is probably, yes, auricula. Now, I don't know whether to anglicize the pronunciation of your name. I want to say telaretus, but I don't know. So correct me if I'm wrong there. But auricula is a great example. So this is going to turn into, let's use phonetic notation here. So we're going to start off, this is our Latin. Let's just write it like Romans. Ooh, pretty. But what we have is something more like this, auricula. In old Anglese, we're going to have something like ari. Oh, first of all, let's delete the final vowel. Auricle. And then I think what we want to do is have the same thing happen here. So CR or CL are going to epithesize a vowel. Oh, it's a short E. Telaretus. Excellent. Yeah, someone, who is it? Telaretus points out regula in the data set. Now, my interpretation of this is that this is a much less adapted word compared to tabula and tegula. I mean, look at what it means. It means a monastic rule. So no one who's talking about this is not going to be familiar with Latin in some way. And there was a sort of a reading pronunciation of Latin current in Anglo-Saxon England that would not have deleted that vowel. So that's my interpretation there. I don't think we can treat all of these as coming exactly from the same set. But let's say, for the sake of argument, first thing that happens is we delete the final vowel. So we're going to delete the final vowel, rule 44. Then we are going to, then it's anyone's guess what the next rule is. Let's just say 4. So we're going to have rule 4 apply, which is going to give us article. And then we are going to maybe palatalize that C. What rule is that? 6. So arichel. And then finally, we will epithesize a vowel to make this nice arichel. Rule 47. And so what we get is arichel, which is kind of nice. All right, so I'm satisfied. I don't think we did any special treatment for CL. No special treatment, which really will mark this out among the Romance languages, because usually this CL cluster does get special treatment. Okay. Next, koku. I don't think we have anything in particular to do here. This is fairly no special treatment as well, I think. But when we get to CT, this is interesting because we do have examples of this from in our data set. So lactuca becomes lachtrich. So let's just ignore the second part. But see how the CT becomes HT, which represents a velar fricative and then T. Lachtrich. This is really interesting. Now, this HT and CT are actually cognate sequences. And it seems that it was close enough, this was close enough for the Anglo-Saxons to be able to sort of map it onto something that sounded sort of similar in their language, which is sort of the same thing I did with the ow to ah. So I think we could say HT, which is going to be a ht kind of thing, or maybe a ht sort of thing, depending on the vowel before it. Oh, excellent question. Chrysacian, does TL still merge with CL? Yeah, that's a good question. I think we probably should, because we see that really early in Latin. I don't think we have a different... So maybe we could have them all go to CL. I think that's reasonable, unless we have any counterexamples. No, we don't. Yeah, so let's have that merger. Excellent point. Right, okay. Next, geminates. Old English has no problem with geminates, so no special treatment. Moving on. DR, GR, and BR. So these are sort of leniting clusters. Let's see what we have. So we don't have any DRs. But we do have, no, we don't have any GRs, but we have a BR, which is febris. Febris, which comes in as fever. So I think what we do in this case is we treat it as, basically we treat B in general as going to this F phoneme, which is voiced intervocalically, or voiced between voice segments, we can say. And then we'll just let our epenthesis rule get us fever from fevre. Oh, Yellow, great question. Is this a new world building project? No, this is just this is a little side project. All right, so how are we going to write this down? I don't think we have anything to do with DR, GR, but we could say BR becomes FR. And we can keep going. So this short E, or the AE diphthong, what are we going to do there? Let's see what we have. Do we have anything? Well, we have caesare becoming casere, but this is a late loan. You can sort of tell there's some weird stuff going on with this word, the ere suffix. It seems that this is being confused with the arius suffix, like being treated as an agent noun. But I think that there's something to be said about the I becoming a in Old English that we may want to use. The problem is that the merger of e and I is, as far as I know, fairly early. So it may not be possible for us to disentangle them again. It's almost certain, well, I won't say it's almost certain, but because casere is attested late, it's probably a loan that has not come in through unbroken chain of transmission, but as a result of some sort of process of education. So I don't know if we want I to become a, or if we want to just treat these both as some kind of eh. Let's see if we can find one that's actually not got other things going on there. So sextarius, this is a good example. So this gives us e, sester. see if we can find another example of short E. Short E. Menta, here we have the nasal playing tricks on us again, and making the E, the E raised to E. So that doesn't work. Gemma, nasal again. Episcopus, we've lost the E. So no, we don't have any clear examples other than sester. So I think having it go to short E is the most reasonable thing. So then let's take a word like so caelum, heaven, sky, which is going to come in as something like kelu. And then this is going to give us, with our palatalization rule, not an easy word to say, palatalization, too many L's. Celu, actually we're going to probably delete the U first, so kel, kelu, kel, chel, chel, something like that. So that's a fine way to say heaven, chel. Okay, so given that, we can leave casere as a bit of its own strange case. The next thing it asks us to consider is something that we've already dealt with, which is the fate of the long e, short I, and the oi diphthong. And actually, we have some examples, poina, of the oi, which goes to pin, and we have an Old English derivational morpheme here, but we can ignore that for the purposes of this. We get poina to pin, and this, again, we have the influence of a nasal, which is going to make the vowel raise, so we don't have to worry about that one. Pensare, pinzian. Here we have some more Old English morphology. What's interesting is that this N was probably not said by people who spoke Latin from birth, but people who learned it later in their book pronunciation probably had it. We can contrast the fate of pensare with the fate of mensa. So something like mesa, which gives us mise. Interesting, we have these dual reflexes of this NS cluster. And in both cases, an E is before it and it raises to E. Or I'll say that more sensibly. An E vowel is before it and it raises to E. So we can't take that. We can't really take that as help. Otherwise, the only example that's clear, I think, is clericus, which does raise to E. Not sure entirely what to make of that, as that doesn't comport with the other things we've seen. Like, yeah. Well, actually, to be honest, these long E's in the later loans are all over the place. Regula, shortening to short E. We have tegula, raising to, I should just say the names of the vowels. Regula, E, shortening to E. Tegula, raising to E. Maybe under the influence of this palatal. Yeah, it's a bit of a mess. Mensa, raising to E. I'm just going to wash my hands of it and say short E. No. I'm not going to say short E. I think we want to still have a long short distinction here. So let's say E goes to I'm being pulled in two different directions, one of which wants to maintain the Old English long-short system, and one wants to get rid of it as we do in the Romance languages. What am I to do? What am I to do? I think what we're going to want to do is say that this is a very divergent form of Romance and maintain the split, because our later sound changes are going to want there to be a split. So let's have e and oi go to e, and let's have short e go to e. I think that's what we should do. And similarly, we should have short e go to short e go to e. So no change there really. But the I diphthong should maintain its length. Should maintain its length. So we have something that looks very un-Romance here, except for the lowering of E to A. Okay, that's good. Onwards and upwards. Okay, so 14 is talking about the Latin third conjugation. So what to do with this ere infinitive ending. I'm going to punt on that for now, because I'd like to get, just like with Athiku, I'd like to get more of the individual sounds dealt with first. Okay, F. What to do with F? I think the fate of F is quite clear in Old English. So the fate of Latin F, we're not, I think, going to see the kind of debuccalization going to H that we see in, say, Spanish. Sorry, Satan, I know that you were rooting for that, because I don't think that is a feature that really coincides with an Old English substrate. F should say F, but also subject to the positional voicing that F has in Old English. And I think that febris is a good piece of evidence for that. We don't have a lot of medial Fs in Latin anyway. Right. I think H, as much as we might like to keep it because Old English has it, I think H should be gone. I don't think there's much chance that Latin speakers would have had H in 500. So, but an H can be reintroduced into this language just like it was in French from Germanic borrowing. So don't worry, we'll still have H in the language eventually. Okay, we've already dealt with the initial palatalization of G and friends. Now let's try the medial palatalization. And it looks like it's just going to be exactly the same. So sigillum gives us seyel in this word inseyel. So good, easy. Medial L, this is basically to account for Portuguese. No need to worry about it for us. Telaritus, actually the au to o thing is a lot later than many of the handbooks lead us to believe. The forms in late Latin that correspond to classical au that are in o seem to be from other dialects, like other very closely related dialects. You know, what things that people call rustic varieties. Yeah, Tunglio FL if we want to treat I as Proto-Germanic I, Latin I as Proto-Germanic I, then the long A is what we would want, like we see in casere. And I wonder if that's what we should do. I wonder if that's what we should do. I'm not sure. Let's see. We'll put big question marks beside it, and we'll see what looks cooler and see what feels more in keeping with the language. Okay, so we're down to now 22. El yod. Yeah. And I don't know that we have any examples of this. I don't think we have any examples of this in the data set, which is a shame. But basically what seems to happen with yods in loan words, like look at kamisia, gives us chemis. It doesn't actually seem to have any impact, perhaps other than causing some umlaut. So I think we just say L. I think we're just going to lose that yeah. Although with umlaut potential. Keep that in mind. Then we have these nasal clusters. So things that come from words like so homine. So what's this going to look like in our, well, no, let's use another example. Let's use femina. So we have femina, which is going to lose this sort of weak vowel here, femna, and that's what we're referring to by this rule. So what are we going to do there? I don't think we have anything in the data set that will tell us either way what to do. This is something that gets resolved to MM in French, to MBR in Spanish. I think in our case, are we going to want to keep it as MN? Can Old English handle MN? Yes. We even have a word famne. Famne, which is actually not cognate with femina, despite the fact that it means maiden. And femina means woman. So I think what we do is we just leave it. We just leave an MN cluster. Then we move on to intervocalic N, again to account for Portuguese. We don't need to worry about it. NS, PS, RS. So I think what we need to do for NS is just have it be S. But I don't think we need to change the others. Old English doesn't seem to have any issue with PS or RS. I mean, it doesn't have any issue with NS either, but we lose that really early in Latin, so I don't think we would keep it. So that's my thinking there. Next up, so yeah, we can always change it if it ends up producing something that looks ugly, or looks not ugly, but out of keeping with our idea. Next up, short O, which I think we are very clearly just having O. Although I think I'd like to revise Rule 28 to make sure we can keep our long vowels. So long O stays, short U goes to O. All right. Then PLCL FL. This is going to be of interest in Spanish, French, Portuguese, but not to us. So nothing, no special treatment. PT. I don't think we have any PT, so we have to decide what to do. I can almost see this going to FT in imitation or by analogy to the CT case, and because FT is so common in Old English, and I believe this is what happens in Old Norse as well, orthographically speaking. So you see PT and it's pronounced as a fricative rather than a stop. I think that's slightly vibes based, but I'm okay with it. So FT. Then we have some more yod resolution things, and these are all going to be the same. So delete yod with umlaut. By the way, yod refers to the J, IPA J, the Y sound. Cool. Qua and gua. I think we shouldn't have any problem just keeping this. Here we have coquina becoming kitchene. Kitchene. So we lose that wa on the qua and just become kitchene. Although we do have ample qua in Old English. Quarter, prison, as an example. Yeah, not sure. I almost am inclined to say that we could do something like Spanish does with this, which is if it's before an A vowel, then we keep the W, otherwise delete it. So before A, CW, GW, after otherwise CG. All right. Come in Old English is kuman. Kuman. So it's queman in earlier queman, but it's kuman by Old English. Although the past tense form is quom or com. So we actually do see variation in that. Yeah, Sulian's got it. Okay. Let's see, how far? Oh, we're almost done. Great. I think we'll definitely get to the end of this, do some words, and then hang up our hats for the day. Proud of our accomplishments. So R is not going to change, although will cause breaking before a consonant. Intervocalic T and D, these are interesting. So it looks like our examples of T in the core set of loanword adaptations are protected from lenition in castra, protected from lenition in gigante, maybe protected from lenition in strata, depending on the order of the final vowel deletion. Although I think if the lenition had happened in spoken Latin by this point, we would be borrowing strad instead of strat. So I think we are going to be predating the lenition of T and D, or at least T. What's our D situation like? Candela, protected. Discu, initial protected. Draco, protected. Yeah, no more Ds. However, when we get down to the later loans, we start to see things that look like clinicians. So abatem is loaned as abod. Another example would be acetum, loaned as eched. Eched. Latina, lingua latina, loaned as laden. So I think what we're dealing with here is a dividing line between early and late borrowings. And since we're taking the early borrowings as our gold standard, I think we'll keep this lenition out of it. Although one thing that we're going to lose is our beautiful the in Old Anglese. So that'll have to be reintroduced by Germanic loans. Okay. All right, checking up on the chat. Yeah, Chrysosian, butina becomes biden, but this is also a later loan. So it has the same thing as abatem, the same thing as acetum, same thing as latina. Interestingly, moneta doesn't, so who knows what's really going on there. Interestingly, also radicem becomes radic, and we don't have radic. Yeah, so what we make of that is, I suppose, anyone's guess. Right, okay, so then final consonants. So final consonants are basically going to, I think are basically going to fall out. We don't have any examples here because we're using these sort of, these vowel final forms. But if you have a third person singular, like wenit, he comes, we'd have to take this into Old Anglese as something like, so it depends on what we do actually. Do we imitate some of the other Romance languages and delete the T, then delete the final vowel because we're already committed to that, giving us something like when, which is going to raise later on to win, or do we keep that final consonant? So then we get wenit, and then something like, I'm not sure, maybe wenet, winet. I don't know. Not sure. My instinct is to go with this more reduced form. But I could be wrong. For now, we'll see what the consequences are of just deleting all of these final consonants willy-nilly. Tate is another special case, so we can ignore that. Tra, pra, kra. I think here we are going to do what we did with, where is it? Tra, dra, gra, bra. We've been treating P like B as going to F. So in that case, we would say tra, fra, kra. Subject to change at a later time. All right, next. Tia, cha. I think this is a clear case of just palatalizing. with umlaut potential. We haven't talked about umlaut yet. That's going to be a thing. U is going to stay as U unless we get umlaut. Germanic W, ha ha ha. We at least know what to do with this one. So that's going to stay X. Let's see. Excellent stuff from the chat coming in. Dricksarker, could we delete the consonant but not the vowel so we get wine? Ooh, that's attractive. So let's try this again. So alternative hypothesis. Wenit, then we have the vowel deletion happen. There's no vowel to delete. Then we get weni, then wene, wine. Oh, I like that. I like that a lot. Okay, so Chrysostion points out copper is evidence against PR to FR since the epenthetic vowel is added later. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Although it is a later loan, but I almost feel like maybe we shouldn't be so mean to P intervocalically. So P stays, B goes to F, and then we can just keep P as it is. X, what to do with X? So Old English had X. It shouldn't be of too much difficulty to... Oh, no, that's a different one. Where is it? No, I want... Oh, it's going to be very hard for us to find. So we have essentially a... this is the thing I was looking for. We have x going to x. So it's going to end up being x. Either way, no matter what we do. The other thing, the other potential, instead of doing x, is what we have here with sextarius, where it becomes s. So not totally sure. It's either x or s. And then we have our stress shift, our vowel deletion, and our epenthesis. And that's it. Those are all of our big rules. We've not discussed these more special cases, but I think we are now able to actually start working on some vocabulary. And I have some examples that I made earlier, just like on a cooking show, some fun words that show examples of the different rules. So let's do that in the time remaining, and this can be a bit like a little bit of payoff. And then if as it seems to be that you're into this kind of exercise, then we can definitely in a future stream expand it and go beyond the old Anglese period into middle and modern. Okay, so let's take as an example. So we have 130. So from 2 to 130, so 129. Let's find a random number generator. And we want from 2 to 130. All right, let's see what we're going to work on first. 124. Luna. All right, this one. This one is going to be pretty easy for us. Oh, let's just get the top ready. So Luna. So we're not going to change initial L. Long U is going to stay U. N is going to stay N, and we're going to lose our final vowel. So we get loon, which is going to turn into loun in modern English. or modern Anglese. So, loon. And I see the chatter in the chat about declensions, and I would like to keep some case forms. I think it's possible that we could try and rescue the nominative at some point. Let's get some, maybe for the Latin third declension, those specifically the ones that look kind of like those Old English weak nouns, the N ones, like Draco. Maybe we can have a nominative accusative distinction there, or maybe in the second declension, the us nouns, which Old French kept that S ending in the nominative for quite a while. So we could probably do that for Old Anglese as well. It just depends. It might just be an S suffix that gets stuck on, but we'll see. Especially if we're not. Yeah. Well, anyway, we'll see. I won't say more about that. Let's try another one. Loon. 103. Ooh, parabla. Word. Okay, this is going to put us through our paces. So we start off with p. So I think we're going to need to actually do this one in the full. So we have parabla. Okay, so we are going to want to brighten all of that. So well, first of all, let's delete the final vowel. Then let's Anglo-Frisian brighten that. And then we're going to restore the back A. We are going to take the B and turn it into an F. And then we're going to appendicize to get paravel. Paravel. And we might also want to delete this intertonic vowel here, paravel. And finally, we're going to want to break. Wait, are we going to want to break that? Let me just double check the breaking rule. Yeah, only before a consonant. So it really depends on when we delete this. If we delete this, if the breaking rule applies after this, then we would have like paravel. Unclear. Yeah. I think I'm not sure what to do with that. Let's keep it at paravel for now. Because that's respectable. I think we're going to run into some rule ordering problems soon enough. So we're going to have to make this a little less hand wavy and informal and a bit more nailed down, but not today. Paravel is my attempt. Telaritus, we did scrap the us deletion for the accusative only hypothesis, but we're not necessarily committed to that for life. So there's a possibility that we can when we start to work on the morphology, maybe we'll change our mind. And as far as the plural, yeah, so the source of the Italian plural is, I think, something that people like to debate. I am not sure. I assume that we're going to want to take our plural from the accusative. However, if we end up having a separate nominative case, maybe we'll have a period in which there's also a different nominative plural. And Elijah, what happens to stress is we just robustly go right to the start of the word. So rigid word initial stress. All right, what's the next word? 59. Oh dear. This is going to put us up against our tate thing. No, let's do something else for now. Well, we can try and see what happens with our rules. So we're going to want something like so we have voluntate to begin with, and then where are we going to, let's get back our rules. So we have volontate, the lowering of u. Then we are going to want to get rid of the long vowels, get rid of the final vowel, so we have voluntat. Then we're going to want to brighten that voluntat. And then I think we haven't talked about this, but Old English doesn't allow just any vowel to be in an unstressed syllable. So I think we're going to want to have something like voluntet. Something like that. I don't know. Doesn't voluntet. I don't know. Something isn't quite clicking to me with that word, voluntet. Maybe we want this to sort of be parsed as a separate morpheme and be like voluntat. Keep its long vowel. I don't know. But for now, by rigidly applying the rules, we have something like volontat or volantat, volontet. Yeah, something like that. Volontet, maybe. That one's not that satisfying. And let's do another one. 70. Lumbu, loin. Okay. Here we have something I think it's pretty lomb. Lomb. That's easy. That didn't even require scrolling. Back up here. Let's try another one. 44. Farina. Okay. Okay, so here we have something like fatten. Fatten. There we can at least have our brightening stay. So fatten. That one feels more like it. Oh, 43. Credere. All right, so now we have a verb. This is interesting. So we're going to have cre, stay. And the two choices with these third conjugation verbs are to do what French does, which is treat them regularly. So we lose that intertonic vowel in credere, so credere, and then just let the chips fall where they may. Or we can refashion them as second conjugation verbs, so things like ere, like habere in Latin, which is what Spanish does, and which avoids the mess of suddenly the root consonant colliding with the infinitive ending. Let's see what happens if we take the French option. So, credere, we're going to lose this to become credere. We're going to lose this to become creder. And then we're going to get creder, creder. And our infinitive ending is just going to be er. This ER is now the epenthetic E. So we went from credere to credere to creder to creder. Okay. Okay. I don't mind. Let's do one more and then we'll call it a day. 33. So integru or integru, depending. Not going to affect us because we are just being word initial with our stress. So we have something like inter or integer. Integer. All right. So I think that's that. I think that's that. Oh, let's do one more. No, we can't leave it like that. 87. I'm kind of addicted to this. 87. Caballo. So this is going to be caval. 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 Delightful. Okay. All right. I think that's enough. I think my voice is on the verge of giving out, so I'm going to come back to the full screen webcam. And thank you all for stopping by. If you have enjoyed this, if you're new, this is if I'm a new face to you, welcome. This has been great to have you here today, as we've had some fun with Latin, with Romance, and with Old English. So come back. There will be more. We'll follow up on this in a future video. But until then, happy doing nerdy stuff with language. Okay, friends, thank you very much. This has been delightful. I will just say, if you are new to us, we do have a Discord, which is in the description, full of amazing and lovely people, and very friendly too. Absolutely a great bunch. So yes, link in the description for the Discord if you want to come join us and you're not already involved. If you are already involved, well, I will see you on the Discord. Other than that, the next stream will be announced also on the Discord. We aren't quite able to do regular weekly streams during this sort of phase where I'm teaching like a maniac, but we're going to try and do as much as we can. And so the up-to-date information, along with voice chat events. So we have voice channel events on the Discord as well, which are, more sort of intimate, hosted also by people in the community. So those are also great. Last time I think we were working on a community-driven conlang. We've also had events on writing systems, making writing systems live and stuff like that. So that's good fun. Anyway, that's my little sales pitch. Come to the Discord, have fun with us. And we will see you all next time. Thanks so much for joining us.